Hello and welcome everybody to the National Sewing Circle's question and answer. My name is Leah. I am your moderator for today's event, and I am here with Nicki, who I'm going to have introduce herself in just a moment. But before I do, two things I want to bring your attention to. One is our chat box. That's where you're going to put all of your questions for Nicki through today's entire event, or in the chat if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. We'll get to as many questions as we can in the time that we have, and we always have a lot of fun. So go broad, go wide, go big with your questions. Nicki's really great with her answers, and you'll get a lot of really good information today from her. And then second, I also want you to check out our team is going to drop a link into that chat box for the Snowflake Christmas Tree. It's a sewing project. It is a free download. And if you are looking for something to spice up your holiday decorations and you want to give this a try, this is a free download that you could go ahead and click on and take advantage of right now. So those things are the only two reminders I have for you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nicki. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm staying warm. We had a snowstorm last night, so school was canceled today. So it is officially winter here. But yeah, we're doing great. I'm happy to be here to answer everybody's questions. I do sewing of all kinds. I'm not a huge quilter, but I'm quilting adjacent. So if you have some quilting questions, I can do my best. But garment sewing is my main thing, I guess. I love to sew garments. I like to take patterns and alter them to make different styles. So pattern alterations are fun for me, and a lot of times when I get questions about garments, that's where my mind goes, is right back to the pattern stage, because I went to college for apparel design, and that was one of my favorite classes, was pattern making. So that's kind of how my brain works. But I'll try to give answers in give you options for different ways to do things too, because that's one of the things I love about sewing is there's no one true answer. There's not I can't think of a situation where there's only one way to do things. You can take a lot of different avenues, different techniques to get to the same end point. So it's up to the sewist, and you have so much freedom in that, choosing the way to do things, designing your own projects in every aspect. So I'm excited to see what everybody's up to today and what questions everybody has, and hopefully get them answered.
And an add on to what Nicki just said, if Nicki gives an answer and you have a little bit of crowdsourcing input that you would like to drop into the chat box, you don't need to just ask questions. We can put a little bit of crowdsourcing into the chat box as well. It's a really great way to build community and kind of get to know each other. Even if you want to just say hello, what kind of sewing project you're working on right now, and where you're viewing from. We just love to see how far and wide our audience is whenever we do these question and answers. So without further ado, Nicki, if you don't have anything else, we do have a couple questions that have already come in. And then we'll jump in and towards the end, talk a little bit more about the fun stuff you have going on that might be less sewing adjacent and more life fun. All right, we're going to do Sherry's question first. Sherry wants to know, Nicki, if you have any tips on pressing seams. I can never get a clean press. It's always a bubble. What do you think?
So if you're getting like bubbly seams, like kind of wavy seams, not nice and flat and straight seams, it might have something to do with a step before you're pressing. So getting waves in your seam can a lot of times be a tension issue. So I know I say tension and a lot of people go, ooh, but it's not as scary as it seems to mess with your tension. So getting wavy seams to me tells me that, especially if you're working on a knit, that tells me that the knit is getting stretched out as it's going under the presser foot. And the fabric being stretched out, then it gets kind of locked in that position by the seam. So you want to make sure your knit fabric isn't stretching out as it's going under the presser foot, and you can slightly increase your stitch length You can decrease your presser foot pressure if that's an option for you. It's an option on my FOF Passport 2.0. You can check your machine manual, see if you can do that. You can use a walking foot to help feed that fabric under the presser foot evenly. Making sure you're using the right needle for your fabric helps everything lay flat and smooth. So making sure you're using a stretch or a ballpoint or a jersey needle when you're sewing on knit fabrics. If you're sewing on just a regular cotton woven fabric, making sure you're using a universal needle in the right size. So a size 75, 80, or 90 is a good kind of middle of the road size of universal needle to use for 95% of your projects. So making sure your tension is right and all the settings on your machine is right can help you get a nice, smooth, even, flat stitch. But if you have some waves or bubbles in your seam, those can be pressed out. And if you're not getting those pressed out flat, you can try using steam if your fabric allows it. If you're using, most types of fabric will allow you to use steam. Velvet doesn't like to be pressed because of the nap, will get crushed, and some fabrics are heat sensitive, so you can burn them if they are exposed to heat that's too hot, and that you'll have like a shiny kind of sheen on part of the fabric that you pressed. So we don't want that. And if you don't want, or if your fabric can't be pressed down hard, you can hold the iron a little bit away from your fabric and just use the steam button to steam, and then use your fingers to kind of finger press just right along the seam. So it does depend on what kind of fabric you're using, but hopefully some of those things will help you get a nice flat seam without any bubbles in it.
All right, a little comment that I'm going to slide in before we get to our next question. So Barbara, I do see a comment in here from you. It's about interlining. I'm not sure what your question is though, Barbara. So if you would like to clarify, drop a little bit, add on to what you already have in the chat box. We'll get to your question when I see that drop in. And in the meantime, we're going to do Tamara's question next. So Tamara is making a reversible beanie, and one side is rib knit, the other is French terry. The directions call to hand stitch the opening, which is used to turn it right side out. That's what is going to be stitched closed, hand stitching. Well, my hand stitching looks terrible on the rib knit. Is there a way to sew this closed on my machine? Tamara wants to know.
Yes. So to make a reversible beanie, so if the opening is left along the seam that goes around your head like here, you can take that opening to the machine and just edge stitch it, which is just stitching as close to the edge as you can get while still being on the fabric and closing that opening with your stitches. So you can do that. The stitches will be visible for that little bit, so you can like have that at the back if you want, or you can just extend that and top stitch the entire thing all the way around. It'll close the opening in the stitches, and then you'll have a little top stitching line around the circumference of your beanie. You'll want to make sure you do that stitch in a stretch stitch though, because the stitch that goes around your head, obviously it's going to stretch a little bit when you put the hat on. So it's going to stretch around your head and then hold kind of tight to your head, so it's not super loose. It's how beanies fit. So you want to make sure that seam has stretch built into it. So the triple stretch stitch is a really good one for that, because it looks like a straight stitch, but it's 2 stitches forward and 1 stitch back. So it's building in a little extra thread in that seam, which allows it to stretch and open up as that fabric gets stretched. So triple stretch stitch is a good one for that, to close up that opening. And yeah, that would be a good option for that.
Okay, I think that's a really popular project now. Like you said, the snowstorms have started for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere. Good luck. Let us know if there's anybody else making beanies. Maybe you've encountered that and have a solve for it as well. If you'd like to add that into the chat, I'll keep an eye for that too. Let's do Paula's question next. Paula wants to know, is there a trick or a rule to making the neckline in a t-shirt or sweatshirt look professional? Meaning lay it straight, no wavy neckline. What do you say to that?
Yes. So this kind of goes along with the first question we were talking about and getting things to lay flat and not be wavy. So for a t-shirt, you're probably using knit fabric. So those tips that I talked about earlier for knit fabric definitely apply. Using a stretch, jersey, or ballpoint needle on your machine. Use all-purpose thread or polyester thread. All-purpose thread is a polyester core cotton wrapped thread. So the polyester part of that thread allows it to have a little bit of give to it. So if you're using 100% cotton thread, there's no give at all. If you stretch that seam at all, it's just going to break. So polyester thread isn't like stretchy like elastic thread, but and you should be building stretch into those seams with the type of stitch you choose, but it's like a little safety net kind of. If you stretch that seam to the end of the amount of stretch you built in with the stitch, the polyester thread just gives you a little bit of wiggle room, so you have even less chance of your seams snapping. So polyester or all-purpose thread. My most favorite tip for decreasing the waviness of seams is using tissue paper. So the tissue paper that you get in your gift bags at Christmas, the tissue paper that a lot of commercial patterns are printed on, save some of those scraps and just put it underneath your layers of fabric as you are stitching that neckline. And that just kind of stabilizes the fabric. It helps prevent it from being stretched out as it's going under the foot. And then you can just tear away that tissue paper from the wrong side of the seam afterward. And of course, still give it a press, because pressing is another huge tip for making things look professional. A good steamy hot press, if it is available for your fabric, just makes things look nice and crisp and super, super professional. So a good press will help that. And those tips I talked about earlier to prevent the fabric from stretching out as it going under the seam, being a walking foot can be hugely helpful. If you don't have a walking foot, other feet that help the fabric kind of roll or feed under the presser foot are a roller foot, a Teflon foot, sometimes called a PTFE foot. It's a white foot usually that's just got kind of a slick underside that helps the fabric kind of slide through, so it's not getting stretched or there's no tension being put on it as it's going under the presser foot. And of course, decreasing your presser foot pressure, as I mentioned earlier, can be hugely helpful. Something else I want to mention for making your neckline look professional is you can top stitch using a double needle, which a double needle is, it just makes things look really professional, because that's the type of finish that your shirt has when it comes from the factory, especially on hems, the edge of sleeves. But you can do that double needle top stitching along your neckline too, and have a little, it just makes it look a little more detailed, which in my opinion makes it look a little bit more professional. So if you don't have a double needle, that's fine. Just, doing your top stitching on the shirt to top stitch the seam allowances of your neckline down. Just a little top stitching there makes things look great. One of the other benefits of using a double needle is it builds stretch into your seam. So the double needle creates two lines of straight stitching on the front, but on the back it's a zigzag stitch, so it builds stretch into your seam as well. So I think that top stitching detail makes things look really professional. So that's one way to take your homemade things and just kind of elevate them to the next level with just a small amount of, of input can really make things look great.
All right, I'm going to build on this a little bit to tie in the top stitch you talked about with the beanie and a little bit of adding that stretch. Leanne has put a comment in, if you're working on that beanie and you don't have that triple stretch stitch, she can use a very small zigzag, and that allows for some stretch that Leanne has noticed. But Leanne has also said, can you please add on to this? I'm learning too. So what are your thoughts on those 2 stitches? Any other ideas for creating a little bit of that stretch, that give that you've talked about?
Mm-hmm. Yes, zigzag stitch is the other main stretch stitch that people can use. And to make that kind of unobtrusive, if you only want to stitch that small opening instead of doing a whole thing all the way around, you can change the size of your zigzag stitch to make it a little bit narrower, which makes it less visible. Or you can do your top stitching all the way around with a zigzag stitch too, just doing that, all the way around. A zigzag stitch is a totally acceptable hemming stitch. If you don't have a double needle like I was talking about earlier too, that zigzag stitch can go around the bottom of your t-shirts, your sleeves, whatever. It's a great stretch stitch that also looks nice to finish things off.
Okay. Ooh, Barbara dropped in a little bit more detail. So let's go back to Barbara here. Barbara needs to make my 100% wool coat fabric warm. The fabric is lightweight, so Barbara bought batting to interline the fabric, but her quilting friend said that the batting will fall apart if it's not quilted. So Barbara thought I might use permanent spray base to hold the cotton batting to the wool before I cut out the jacket, but is looking for some advice on how to make the fabric warmer for fall and winter wear and how to do that effectively.
Okay. Yeah, so interlining is essentially just another layer of something in between the shell of a garment and the lining. So to interline for warmth, you can use, honestly, you can use any type of warm fabric. If you have like a flannel maybe, and this is not something I have a ton of experience in. I don't normally do like jackets for warmth. So if anybody has any tips on interlining for warmth too, drop them into the comments. But in my mind and in my experience, that fabric that you use for interlining can be almost anything. So if you are hesitant about using batting as the interlining, or if you don't want to, quilt the batting to keep it from falling apart, if you don't want to take that step, you could use another fabric that has a little bit of warmth or has some loft to it, because air is the best insulator. So a fabric that has loft to it has a lot of air built into it, which is going to be good for insulation and good for keeping you warm. So off the top of my head, some warm fabrics for putting in between layers of your jacket, flannel, or even some other wool, maybe not necessarily the outer wool, because that might be bulky and having 2 layers of that would be super bulky, but maybe a less bulky wool would be a good interlining. But that's the extent of my knowledge on that. So sorry, I couldn't be a little bit more specific, but you have options for interlining fabrics as well.
All right. Yes, Barbara, definitely keep an eye on the chat. If anybody drops anything in, you'll be able to see it in there for a little bit of crowdsourcing. I'm going to take it really general with the next question here. This comes in from Angela. So Angela wants to learn from scratch. And I would just like, Nicki, I'm sure Angela's not the only person. So for any of our sewists out there watching that are literal beginners starting from scratch, what tools would you recommend? What is a great starting project? Where would you point them to get that initial project going?
Yeah, so this is a question I get from people who want to jump in, which good for you, Angela. Welcome to the sewing community. It's very exciting to get people started because it's so much fun. And I'm really excited for you and all the fun stuff you have ahead of you. So it doesn't have to be complicated. Walking down, in the sewing aisles of stores can be very overwhelming, and it can be overwhelming to know where to start because you have all these resources on the internet. So if you can choose one resource to start learning and kind of exhaust their library of videos and blog posts and everything, it's helpful to stick to a limited number of resources. So of course, nationalsewingcircle.com is great because there are a ton of videos on different techniques and also little projects to get you started. So that's a great resource to start with. As for tools, you've got your sewing machine, your fabric, and a pair of scissors, needle and thread. That's all you need to get started. You don't really even need rulers and fabric markers or anything like that, because you can work around that. Just get a fabric that you're excited about working with. So a fabric that is in a fun print, and stick with a stable fabric like a quilting cotton, which that's great for beginners to work with because it's, tightly woven, easy to sew on, it's not super thick, and that's like 80% of what Joann Fabrics has is quilting cottons. You have a huge array of colors, patterns, prints, novelty prints, Disney princess prints. So you can make gifts for people, and find a fabric that is perfect for the person or perfect for yourself. So choose from a quilting cotton fabric, choose a fabric that is cute, that you're excited to work with. You can splurge on fabric for your first couple projects to keep that excitement going, make you want to sew more, want to learn more, keep it frustration free. So quilting cotton is a great one to start with. For projects to start with, I recommend starting with something easy, straight lines, straight seams. A pillowcase is a great one because you can make it more complicated. You can put bands on the edge and trim and whatever, but you can start with just the most basic pillowcase, and it can, if you're just starting out, it might take you an hour, but it's totally doable, and it's something that you can use, and something that you can use, immediately, which is great, and great for keeping up your excitement for sewing. So pillowcase, a scarf is a really great one, and a quilting cotton is fine for a scarf too. It might not be the warmest scarf, but it'll be a cute scarf. I did a Facebook video on doing an infinity scarf, like a circle scarf. It's a really easy one for beginners too, because again, it's rectangles of fabric, straight lines, straight seams, and then you get something that is cute and wearable and makes you excited to sew more. So to recap my long answer, choose one or two resources. You don't need a ton of tools, as long as you've got your sewing machine with the right kind of needle on it and thread, some scissors to cut your fabric with, you're good to go. And try not to bite off more than you can chew. So start really small and build up your skills slowly, so that you don't get frustrated. So, and have fun. Just have fun with it. That's what it's all about.
Yes, and Nikki, you mentioned the National Sewing Circle, of course. I would also like to point out that some of the mini series that we do, we're actually about to start one this week, but some of the previous mini series that we have in the National Sewing Circle has taken part in have some really beginner friendly projects that are pretty fun. I know Emily Steffen led a few of them, and she's really great at coaching beginner level sewists through some of these projects so that they're achievable. So if you wanted to look for something small, and they're pretty short as well. So you could just search the National Sewing Circle for some of those previous mini series and check out what was done with those. I think those are some pretty fun projects as well. We have Wanda here too that just purchased a brother's HD machine, needs to take up clothes, learn my machine, everything. So we've got a couple beginners out there. Welcome to all of you. Oh boy. Let's see. Do you want to go super general for your next question, or do you want to dig in with a more detailed one? What do you think, Nikki?
Let's do a more detailed question, then we can go back to being general.
Okay, perfect. We'll do Anna then. Anna is looking to make a felt Christmas tree wall hanging on which my grandchildren can affix felt ornaments. Is there a particular weight of felt that I should be using? And should I bind or finish the edges? Should I include a backing? What kind of details do you think Anna could be adding to this project?
So you can go as finished looking as you want. You can spend a lot of time on this if you want, but for felt, it's not going to ravel on the edges. So you don't need to bind or finish the edges at all. You don't need to have a backing on it at all. If you don't want to, it can honestly just be, your chunk of green felt for your tree hanging on the wall, and then, the ornaments will stick to it because felt is very sticky. Or if you're doing Velcro, that obviously would make it even stickier, but felt kind of sticks to felt just because it has that nap, and the friction of the nap kind of holds it together. So yeah, you don't need to do any fancy binding to it unless you want to make it look more finished. So, you can cut it out, see how you like how it looks, and then you can add a binding to the edges if you decide you want to go that route. And you can bind it in green to match, or you could even bind it in like gold or something to make it give it a little color pop, bind it in red maybe. I don't know. Whole bunch of different things you can do, but that's such a fun idea to make little felt ornaments, different colors, design. You can even add little designs onto the felt ornaments and then decorate your tree with felt. Felt is such a great medium for those kinds of toys because it's durable, the edges don't ravel. So I think that is such a fantastic project, Anna. And if when you're done, you want to add pictures to the National Sewing Circle Facebook page, I think that would be super inspirational for others as well.
Yes, please. We love to see finished projects. Thank you. All right, as promised, we're going to go a little more general here. So we're going to start with Alicia. Alicia has a comment, and I'd love to hear your take. Alicia is having trouble working with stretchy fabrics. So what do you think for any of our sewists out there that are having similar troubles?
Yeah, stretchy fabrics, so knits, are they're a little bit trickier than woven fabrics, I'll say that sometimes, because you have to take a couple of different things into consideration. Obviously, if the seam needs to stretch around your body, like the neckline of my shirt is smaller than my head. So when I put it on, you need that seam to be able to stretch. So that's where your stretch stitches come in, like we were talking about earlier. Zigzag stitch, triple stretch stitch, or using a double needle will build stretch into your seam. So tips for sewing on knits. I mentioned some of them earlier, but they bear repeating because with just a couple of things, couple of different tools, couple different things to keep in mind, the world of knits will be your oyster. And sewing with knits is super fun because they're comfortable to wear. You don't need closures for your garments. You don't need button plackets or zippers or anything like that, because the knit will, stretch and then snap back and kind of mold to your shape, which is great. So when you are sewing knits, one of the main problems that people have is stretching out as it's going under the foot and getting wavy seams. So using decreasing your press or foot pressure if possible, or using a walking foot, making sure you're using a stretch needle. So the stretch needles are your stretch needle, your jersey needle, or your ballpoint needle, which are constructed just a little bit differently. Instead of having a really sharp tip that kind of can slice through the fibers of the fabric, the stretch needles have a slightly rounded tip. So it's still sharp, it'll still poke you and draw blood, but it's, instead of cutting through the fibers, it kind of nestles in between the knit construction of the fabric, and it just kind of prolongs the life of the knit fabric. It helps you to maintain good tension. So make sure you're using the right needle when you're sewing on knits. Using an all-purpose or a polyester thread. And tissue paper can be your friend, like I was talking about earlier, to help stabilize the fabric, to make sure you're not getting ripply seams. And making sure you press your seams afterward. Pressing your seams afterward it's a good tip for all fabrics. But if you are having trouble, say if your knit fabric is jamming down into your throat plate, which can happen a lot of times with jersey knits, which are super like slinky and watery and really comfortable to wear, but can be tricky to sew because they're so like squirrely and hard to deal with. A lot of times at the beginning of your seam, that fabric will get pushed down into the throat plate and jam up everything, and you've got to pull everything out and cut it off and start again. So you can prevent that by starting a couple of stitches in from the edge, and this is true for delicate woven fabrics as well that might get pushed down in the throat plate. Start a couple of stitches in from the edge and then back stitch, and then keep on sewing your seam. Or you can use a starter square, which is just any random scrap of fabric you have. Doesn't have to be knit, doesn't have to be the same fabric, to get your seams started, and then butt up your actual fabric at the back of that starter square and keep sewing right off of the starter square onto your actual fabric, so that you don't have those issues with starting the seam. There's something called a straight stitch throat plate, I do believe, that has just one tiny hole in it. You can't use a zigzag stitch on it. You can only use a straight stitch. That also helps prevent your fabric from getting pushed down into the throat plate, but you have to only use a straight stitch with it. So it's an option, but I prefer doing some of those other things to prevent your fabric from getting shoved down into the throat plate. Because if you just do a couple of those things, that can take care of that problem for you without needing something extra. So those are some tips for working with knits. Hopefully that helps. If you have any more specific questions for your specific problems with knits, feel free to send those in. But hopefully those general tips will help you feel confident to tackle knits again, because it's just a whole wide world of fun knit fabrics. And girlcharlie.com is a super great resource for knit fabrics of all different weights, prints, and colors. That's girlcharlie, CHARLEE.com. It's my favorite online store for knits. And like half of the fun of sewing a project is finding such fun fabric and just playing with such fun fabric. So it's a great online store, an online resource for knit fabrics. Check them out.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with another quick reminder, especially for any of you that weren't with us at the very start of our Q&A session. There are a couple links now that I want to draw your attention to. So our team did put in the search for the live projects that we just talked about, some of those mini series for some of you that are looking for beginner level projects. But there's also at the top of the chat box was one of the first links that was dropped in for a Christmas tree skirt. So if you're looking for a holiday project that you want to use right this holiday season, that project is in there for you to download as well. We do have some time left, so keep your questions coming. We're going to go all the way until we run out of time, and we'll get to as many questions as we can in what we have left. So keep those dropping into the chat box as well. And we're going to go into, I'm going to call this a fan favorite. I know that everybody always likes to get your take on this, Nicki. So Vicky wants to know, what is the best sewing machine? I would say even what is your favorite? And maybe I'll add on, how can people choose one for themselves?
Yes, so this is a question I get asked a lot. So I would say there is no best sewing machine because that's subjective. Everybody has their own ideas of what they like, and that can stem from the type of sewing you do. So if you are interested in building your skills in quilting, you might look for different things in a machine than a garment sewer. But my favorite sewing machine is this FOF Passport 2.0, which is just a workhorse, and it is not as computerized as a lot of the machines on the market today, and I like that about it. A lot of people I talk to will say they like the computerized aspect of their machine because it does the thinking for you, kind of. It will choose the settings for you. If you switch to a different fabric, you can just press a button for what type of fabric you're using, and it will adjust the tension settings accordingly. So a lot of people like that, takes some of the pressure off. But for me personally, I like this less computerized version because I have total control over my settings and I know what's going on. I know all the settings. So maybe it's my controlling personality. I don't know, but that is what I am comfortable with. So this is the Passport 2.0 from FOF. I love that it has this, the integrated dual feed foot at the back. It's a little black bar that comes down and hooks under the presser foot, acts as a built-in walking foot. So it's great for me because I love sewing garments. I love sewing knit garments. So all the things we were talking about earlier about making sure that knit fabric feeds evenly under the presser foot to avoid getting stretched out, that they call it the IDT foot, or IDT technology, the integrated dual feed foot technology. That helps with that. I always have that engaged whenever I can. It just helps things to feed evenly and smoothly so you don't get shifting of your layers either. So I love that about it. You can check out this machine on the FOF website. But for others, so if you are in the market for a sewing machine, you can talk to other people too, and get their experiences on different brands, because everybody will have some amount of brand loyalty. If your friend grew up sewing on a Singer, they will probably have Singer as their favorite because it's just what they have the most experience on. I had brother machines when I was I learned on a Singer, but then when I bought my own, I bought brother machines because they have great options for low cost machines, which was great for a broke college student. I think I paid like $80 for the CS 6000i, I think. And that was a great machine for me. It was lightweight, it was portable. It had all the stitches I needed. It had, zigzag stitch, stretch stitch, and like a buttonhole stitch and a bunch of others. But as a garment sewer, those were the 3 stitches that I definitely needed in a machine. So it had everything I needed. But this FOF just feels a lot more sturdy to me and it should because it costs a lot more. But it has that nice sturdy feel. It goes through layers like a boss. I sew like faux leather purses. I sewed a backpack that I use like upholstery fabric for. So layers and layers of thick fabrics. This guy has absolutely no problem with. I love that about it. So the best way to get a feel for the machine is to go into a dealer and sew on it. If that is an option for you, it's the best way to play around with the features and see if you're going to be comfortable on that machine. If that is not an option for you, and you're shopping online, reading reviews can be super helpful. So you can type into your search bar FOF Passport 2.0 review and get YouTube videos and get reviews people have written about it to give you an idea of the features. And YouTube is great for this because a lot of times they'll have videos of the machine actually sewing, so you can see how it works without, actually being there. So reviews are a great way to figure out how that machine works for other people before you make that investment. So again, it's all up to you as the sewist as to what you like in a machine. Quilters a lot of times like more space here in the arm area so that they can roll up their quilt and have everything slide through easily. So it depends on where you want to go with your sewing. It will take a little bit of research to figure out what's best for you. But if you've ever seen any of my videos, like my Facebook Live videos, I'm always sewing on this machine. So you can get a feel for or see how that machine works. And I'm just a huge fan of this machine. So shop around and yeah, have fun.
Amazing. Good luck finding a machine if you are searching. I'm going to go to Margaret's comment next. So, Nikki, at the very top, when you were telling us certain things that you love to do about sewing, Margaret agrees and says that she also enjoys doing the same to patterns, getting them to her liking and making them for others. And it's great to think outside of the box. So I was hoping that maybe you would elaborate a little bit on where do you get your inspiration if you're creating a pattern, or how do you attack adapting a pattern when you're making a garment, either for yourself or as a gift? If you talk just a little bit about that process for you creatively.
Yeah, absolutely. So pattern alteration, altering a pattern for design, to change up the design of it, is you can do it fairly easily with just a couple of lines. So if you see a shirt in a magazine or somebody walking around in a shirt that you really love and you want to make that style, you have to note what is different about it, if there are different style lines about it. And if you're not to the place where you can just draw a pattern from scratch, you need a base pattern to start from. So you need a pattern that, fits you and is the same basic block. Of course, it's easiest to start from a basic block that is kind of similar to what you're going for. But of course, you can change the lines of the pattern any way you want to change it up and get to your desired finished point. So starting from a block, you can change the neckline. Say you've got a crew neck and you want it to be a V-neck. That's a really simple alteration. You can just pull that line down. I have my little pattern pieces here. So if you've got your bodice front, so this has a crew neck or the scoop neck, I guess. If you wanted to make it a V-neck, take a pencil, draw on your pattern, draw a new style line, cut that away, and you can make yourself a V-neck. So that's a really easy line to change. If you want to add a yoke, so you want to add a top yoke, make it a different fabric, a different color, that's another easy one. Create a line wherever you want that yoke line to sit, kind of right here in the middle of the armhole. Draw your pattern line here. Cut along that line, add seam allowances to each new pattern piece. So you'll have your top pattern piece, add a seam allowance to that cut edge, and then add a seam allowance to the cut edge on this bodice pattern piece as well. And then you can, color block it, however you want to do it. You can do that to the back or the back bodice as well. I don't have any backs in my pile, but you get the idea. So, and if you want to make it, say, a more boxy style. So this has some shaping lines to it. And this has darts too. You can change the style of the shirt by ignoring this dart here. That'll make it wider in the waist. You can bring this side out more to give you more in the waist, to make it more boxy. Conversely, you can bring it in a little bit more to nip it in, make it closer fitting. So just some manipulation of some of these basic lines can give you a whole different style. And this is my favorite kind of alteration to do is simply cutting the pattern apart in strategic places. And so you can have different fabrics, whatever. I made a shirt a while back where I cut a part off of the front and the back, and I made a new shoulder insert kind of piece. I did it in lace. So you have a little lace shoulder insert simply by breaking that bit of pattern off of the front, and I had to break a little bit off of the back too, and join those two pieces to make that kind of a center piece. So you kind of create a new pattern piece so that you can do it in different fabrics. So that's a fun way to manipulate a pattern to get a whole array of different styles from one pattern.
All right, we're going to go to Anne next. We're going to go travel into the world of making bags. So Anne says, question, I've heard some bag makers use felt instead of a standard stabilizer. What would I look for in felt if I'm going to use that as a stabilizer?
So if you want to use felt as a stabilizer, it is going to add some loft to your bag as well as a little bit of stability. So I don't know what array felt is available in, honestly, because at my fabric store here, the felt comes in 8 by 10 squares and that's it. And I use it for toys for my daughter. But I'm sure you can get felt in bigger pieces and maybe in different weights. I'm not quite sure. But felt, I feel like it's not going to be as stiff as if you were to use just Peltex obviously is the stiffest stabilizer. It's like a craft stabilizer. It's like cardboard almost. So felt isn't going to give you that level of stability. It will give you, I think it'll give you enough stability to make a bag kind of stand up on its own, depending on how big the bag is and what fabric you're using for the bag. But if you can get your hands on the felt and feel it, you can kind of get an idea of how much stability it's going to give you in your bag and if it's what you're looking for. But I think the felt is going to give you a medium kind of stability. So it's not going to be a super lightweight stabilizer. It's not going to be a super heavy, crisp stabilizer. I think that would be a good one to use for if you're just looking for a little bit of body to your bag without a lot of crispness, because the felt is still going to move and fold a little bit, but still add some structure to the bag and a little bit of loft too, because it's going to be a little bit thicker than a regular stabilizer. So I've not tried that before. I'll be interested to hear your results if you end up doing it. But yeah, I think felt would be a good sort of middle of the road, medium weight stabilizer to give your bag a little bit of structure.
Okay, before we move into our next question, I want to issue a little bit of a last call. We are getting near the end of our time for today's Q&A. Don't worry, we'll be back again with more. But for today, if you've been sitting on a question and you haven't dropped it into the chat box yet, now is the time to go ahead and put it in, and we'll get to as many as possible before we have to say goodbye. But we're getting close to that time. So this is going to be the call for those last minute questions. And then we'll jump to Leanne's question. This is still about felt here. And Leanne wants to know, can you mix cotton with the felt, and can you quilt the felt?
Yes to both. That's a very, felt is a very kind of all-purpose fabric. It's great to use. It does not have stretch to it really. It's because it's not a woven fabric. It's like a pressed fabric. So you can combine it with other fabrics. Depends on what project you're doing, but you can definitely combine it with other projects. It's going to be heavier weight than the cotton, probably, depending on what kind of cotton you're using, of course. But so it's going to be heavier than the other fabric. But if you are doing like the question earlier, a tree, like that Christmas tree wall hanging, and you wanted to do cotton for the backing, totally a great option for a backing if you wanted to, turn that right side out and have those edges be finished. Having something like as a backing can do that for you. The one thing I will say about felt is it will dull your needle quicker than other fabrics, just because of the nature of felt. The needle going through it will dull that needle quicker. So keep an eye on your needle. Use an all-purpose needle with felt, but after like 6 hours of sewing time on a needle, that's when typically it's going to be dull enough to warrant changing your needle. So if you're sewing on felt, it's just going to accelerate that a little bit. So keep an eye on your tension. Keep an eye on if you start getting flagging, which is where the fabric kind of jumps on the bed of your sewing machine. That's a sign that the needle is struggling to pierce through the fabric and you need a new needle. So keep that in mind if you're doing a lot of sewing with felt this holiday season.
All right, it seems to be the theme of the day. We're sticking with felt for our next question. It comes in from Donna, and Donna wants to know if felt is washable in the machine.
I would say yes, but be very careful. So you don't want to expose it to too much friction, and definitely don't expose it to too much heat. So you can wash it. I would say you can wash it on the delicate cycle in your washing machine and then hang dry it. You don't want to put it in the tumble dry with heat, because that will cause it to shrink and do all kinds of things that you don't want it to do. So delicate cycle, cold water, and hang dry is what I would recommend for felt.
Okay, so we have reached the end of the questions that we have for today. So Nicki, I want to give you a moment before we say farewell. First, to tell us where we can find you, and second, and like I teased at the beginning, I know it's not entirely sewing related, but I know you have some other avenues of creativity that I'd like to give you a chance to talk about before we say farewell. So I'm going to give you the floor. Let us know what you've been up to and what's coming up for you.
Yeah, so you can find me. I have an Amazon author page because I am an author. A lot of times creative people, like you said, have different avenues for their creativity. So a lot of crafters are omni crafters. They sew and quilt, or they do beading jewelry or whatever, because there's just so much creativity to let out. I let out my creativity with writing. So I have a couple of books. And on my Amazon author page, on Amazon, if you search NL LaFoille, you can find me. I have 2 books. And one of the books is going to be available for free. The Kindle version will be free on Wednesday. So you can check that out, give it a read, and write a review. Tell me if you liked it. It'd be super helpful for me. So yeah, and on my Amazon author page, there's links to my personal blog and some other of my social media stuff. So you can find me there. Check out my writing. I write, well, the two books that I have available now are historical romance, but I'm writing more. So there will be, if you subscribe to my Amazon author page, you'll get notified of new releases too. So you can check that out. And yeah, and I'm always glad to be here answering your sewing questions. I'm sewing projects for National Sewing Circle all the time. I have a Facebook Live tomorrow. Actually, I'm sewing an applique pillow. So if you ever have had any questions about applique, check that out on the National Sewing Circle Facebook page tomorrow. I'll be doing a project and talking a lot about applique.
All right. And a reminder, I know, Nicki, you did say this, but anybody out there doing any sewing projects, if you would like to share those projects, National Sewing Circle Facebook page, always fantastic to let the community see what you are sewing. With that said, Nicki, I'm going to just let us go with a few reminders. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us for today's question and answer. There will be another one, I believe, about once a month. So keep your eyes peeled for when the next one is going to be, and you can ask more of your questions then. Our sewing community is fantastic, and we do have those couple projects for you in the links in the chat box. So the first one I mentioned at the very beginning, that's our Christmas tree skirt pattern. That's a free download for you. You can get some holiday decorations rolling if you would like to get that one. And then also a couple mini series that the Sewing Circle, National Sewing Circle, participated in, have some really fun projects that you can dig into that are shorter, like little bite-sized projects. A lot of them are kid friendly. And of course, we have a couple beginners that are watching today, pretty beginner friendly as well. So if you're looking for those projects, the links are in the chat box, and a couple crowdsourced ideas as well that weren't questions necessarily, but a little add on to some of what Nicki had to answer. So without anything else to say, it's just time to say farewell for now, but not for long. We will see you soon. So on behalf of Nicki and the National Sewing Circle, my name is Leah. Thank you so much for joining us. Have an entirely wonderful holiday season. Enjoy your sewing, and we will see you next time.